Bonjour à tous, merci à tous d'être venus aujourd'hui pour cette conférence. Je me présente, je m'appelle Julie Petit, je suis la coordinatrice du projet PROTEGE pour la Nouvelle-Calédonie. Pour rappel, le projet PROTEGE, c'est le projet régional océanien des territoires pour la gestion durable des écosystèmes. C'est un projet qui est financé par le 11e Fonds européen de développement au bénéfice des territoires de la Nouvelle-Calédonie, de Wallis-et-Futuna, de la Polynésie et de Pitcairn. L'objectif général du projet, c'est de construire un développement durable et résilient des économies des PTOM face au changement climatique et en s'appuyant sur la biodiversité et les ressources renouvelables. Oui, ça aussi, il faut que je le dise. Parlez-moi vite. En fait, dans le cadre de PROTEGE, il y a 4 thématiques. La première thématique qui est sur l'agriculture et la forêt, la seconde sur la pêche et l'aquaculture, la troisième sur l'eau et la quatrième sur les espèces envahissantes. Donc c'est dans le cadre de cette thématique qu'on se retrouve aujourd'hui, puisque dans le cadre de la thématique 4, les espèces exotiques envahissantes sont gérées pour renforcer la protection, la résilience et la restauration des écosystèmes, des services écosystémiques et de la biodiversité terrestre. Je vais passer la parole à Patrick pour savoir que dans le cadre de PROTEGE, on a des chefs de file, c'est-à-dire des coordonnateurs, des animateurs dans chacune des thématiques. Et dans la thématique 4, c'est le CEN. Juste un petit point logistique. La conférence de ce soir est enregistrée en vidéo pour à la fois être mise en ligne et aussi pour être partagée avec les autres territoires qui en ont fait d'ailleurs la demande, qui sont intéressés par la Polynésie française et par Wallis-et-Futuna. Pour le micro, donc vous avez vu, vous pouvez donc parler avec les micros. Vous avez des casques pour l'interprétation, puisque Glen, qui va intervenir, va parler en anglais, et vous, c'est interprété en direct. Donc vous choisissez le canal pour avoir en français. Ça sert à rien de parler trop près du micro pour pas que les interprètes, ça soit difficile pour elles, et surtout de parler trop vite, comme je l'ai fait au début de mon intervention. Voilà, c'est tout ce que j'avais à dire. Je vais passer la parole à Patrick pour le CEN.
Merci Julie. Merci Julie. Donc au nom du CEN et notamment de l'équipe PROTEGE du CEN, je vais très rapidement vous présenter le présentateur de ce soir, donc Glen COULSTON, qui est régulateur professionnel en Nouvelle-Zélande. Il a travaillé pendant 21 ans au célèbre DOC NZ, le département de la conservation. Et il a 30 ans d'expérience dans la régulation des espèces invasives en Nouvelle-Zélande et à l'échelle du Pacifique. Il réside au nord de la Nouvelle-Zélande, mais intervient sur l'ensemble du territoire néo-zélandais. Il est le co-directeur d'une société privée avec une trentaine d'agents et de prestataires dans la régulation des espèces invasives. Il a une compétence particulière et sans doute un intérêt particulier pour la régulation des cochons avec l'usage de chiens attrapeurs, avec par ailleurs des technologies innovantes et modernes dont il vous parlera au cours de la conférence. Mais au-delà de cela, il intervient très régulièrement aussi, lui ou ses agents, dans le contexte d'opérations de régulation de cerfs, sachant qu'il n'y en a pas qu'un en Nouvelle-Zélande, vous le verrez, de possums, de lapins, de lièvres, etc., etc. Donc il est très expérimenté et c'est notamment pour cette raison, évidemment, qu'on l'a fait venir. La deuxième chose que je voulais dire, c'est le contexte dans lequel Glen a été invité à intervenir dans le cadre du projet PROTEGE et particulièrement dans la thématique espèces exotiques envahissantes qui, en Nouvelle-Calédonie, est focalisée sur la régulation des cerfs et des cochons. Pour la première fois, en Nouvelle-Calédonie, et on va dire dans le cadre de PROTEGE, donc évidemment grâce à PROTEGE, mais également grâce à la contribution financière majeure de l'agence rurale, une première sur le territoire, donc une première formation de 25 futurs opérateurs de régulation a été menée au cours des 2 dernières semaines. Donc nous sommes actuellement, en tout cas Glen, dans la fin de sa mission qui dure 2 semaines et demie. Donc 25 personnes, je l'ai dit, ont été formées au cours des 2 dernières semaines pour être et pour la première fois des opérateurs de régulation dans des zones où ni les captures de cerfs, ni le piégeage, ni la chasse récréative ne peut régler le problème. C'est notamment le cas des zones prioritaires de forêts humides en tête de bassin versant où la chasse est totalement inexistante. Donc c'est un défi pour réguler ces populations de cerfs dans des zones malheureusement où les impacts sont majeurs et bien plus importants qu'ailleurs. Et Glen a évidemment apporté sa compétence importante, expérimentée sur la base de ce qui est effectué en Nouvelle-Zélande. Mais il n'était pas seul et avec l'ensemble de l'équipe CEN de PROTEGE a été adossée la compétence de la Fédération de la faune et de la chasse, qui est par ailleurs partenaire de cette conférence ce soir. Donc merci à eux, merci à Glen et très bonne conférence à tous.
Kia ora koutou katoa e mihi nui ki te hui nei, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. I'd just like to give everyone warm greetings to this presentation today. It's an honour and a privilege to be able to come and speak to you folks about the work that we do in New Zealand. I tend to have a habit of getting very engrossed in my subjects. I will try not to rattle on too much over some of them. We will be here till midnight otherwise. So just starting with a little overview of pests in New Zealand. We have 21 herbivores that have been introduced. A number of deer species, there's 7 species there, plus Himalayan tahr and chamois. We have feral goats, quite prolific, occasionally feral cattle, sheep and horses. We have quite a problem with rabbits and the European hare, and also a few Australian immigrants, wallabies. There's 5 species of wallabies that have been introduced to New Zealand. In terms of omnivore invasive pests, there's 7 of them there. There's the feral pigs, possums and hedgehogs, plus 3 species of rats and house mice as well. In terms of carnivores, we have 3 of the mustelid family, the ferret, the stoat and the weasel. Feral cats, quite a significant issue. And occasionally in localised areas we have feral dog issues as well. So just moving on to the 4 particular species of interest between deer and pigs, cats and rabbits. Just a little overview. The deer population in New Zealand prior to the 1970s were in plague numbers, devegetating many of the natural areas of New Zealand. During the 1970s to 2000, the deer numbers were brought down and kept very low by wild venison recovery industry for commercial. Collapsed for a couple of reasons, but the value of the meat basically was no longer there and the commercial operators stopped operating. That was around the 2000s. Since then, in many of the remoter areas of New Zealand, deer numbers have crept back up to very similar to pre-1970, and there's some serious degradation happening in those habitats. The pig population, they have continued to steadily increase. New Zealand has a lot more warmer and wetter conditions, which seem to be a bit of climatic variation that's happening. As an R-selective species, their reproductive rates just accelerate in those situations. So there's been a surgence of pig population issues, and that has also been exacerbated by recreational hunters fostering and spreading pigs and releasing them for sport. They are a highly protected food and recreational resource in many areas of rural New Zealand. And there is a lot of variation across New Zealand in terms of their value. In the North Island, they're highly prized. In the South Island, the general community see them as a pest more than a food resource or a recreational support activity. One of the issues with pigs is the vectoring that they do with Phytophthora agathis, which is Cody dieback. Where New Caledonia has a number of Cody species as well. And it basically, Phytophthora agathis kills every tree it infects. We have Tane Mahuta is one of our largest and most sacred trees. It's nearly 2,000 years old, and it would be catastrophic if something like that was to succumb. So there's some very intensive pest control, pig control happening around our Cody forests. Moving on to the rabbits, again, they're another selective reproduction animal. So when the food resources are there, their numbers explode with rapid, large breeding capabilities. The regional populations tend to bounce around a lot between being in plague numbers to being very low. There is a lot of variation. The introduction of rabbit hemorrhagic disease, RHD, has been a bit of a saving grace in terms of providing a pressure release valve when those populations start to spike. The biggest impact with rabbits has been in our drier landscapes. With feral cats, they are deemed to be an invasive and problematic species. They can thrive in any habitat if they do not have population control. They're cryptic and pervasive in their presence. They're rarely seen, but they're always present. We've had issues with a lot of cat-loving groups and residential urban areas exacerbating the issue through uncontrolled breeding in those locations and the animal groups trying to rescue them. And there's very little regulation of cat ownership. We have a saying that for every one you see, there are 40 that you do not see, because they are wary, they are nocturnally driven, and they are very hard to kill as a predator. In New Zealand, the big impacts are on our lizards and our insects, our ground and tree nesting birds, and our 3 native bats. We don't have any legislative regulations on cats in New Zealand, unlike dogs, where there are restrictions on how people keep dogs. Cats are a bit of a open slather. As a result, we're a nation that has one of the highest rates of domestic cat ownership in the world. Just a little note there, in 7 days, 1 cat managed to kill a total of 102 short-tailed bats, and these were only the ones that were found at a site in the central North Island. Another example, 1 cat, when it had an autopsy done, had 24 lizards removed from its stomach. So New Zealand has quite a changing environment in both a climate and in a social context. We have a lot of peri-urban development and expansion of lifestyle residential properties out into our rural landscapes. Those landscapes traditionally had a lot of hunting with dogs and firearms, and that's becoming increasingly difficult. We also have vast areas in New Zealand farmland that is being revegetated for carbon storage, and that is producing millions of hectares of improved habitat for the invasive pests. The forestry companies are having to invest heavily in pest control to protect those plantings that they're putting in. Deer and pigs have for a long time culturally been a part of New Zealand for recreational meat and trophy hunting. As a result of an increase in population, it's getting easier to shoot, and there is an increase in the number of hunters recreationally hunting, but it is still proven to be inadequate to control that population growth as a management tool on its own. There basically are too few animals being harvested at the moment. The other aspect in New Zealand is our society is very much has an increasing environmental conscience. It's been a big movement. As a result, many communities are now funding their own pest control. to protect their natural habitats. In the wealthier communities, they fund contractors like ourselves to come in and do work. In some of the less wealthy communities, they get out there and they undertake that pest control themselves. The local government and New Zealand central government have had to ramp up funding for pest management, and that is predominantly through providing landowners with funding grants and also delivering pest control contracts in those high value conservation areas. As a result, there is a lot more pest controllers like myself starting to come through because of that increase in resources by those various parts of the society. It's a situation where adaptive management strategies have a big part to play in managing such a wide spectrum. With New Zealand's hunting and gathering being of food having been a strong part of our heritage, we get a lot of tensions over that. The cost of pest control has a factor. Essentially, you have to balance those environmental, cultural, social and economic outcomes and values across a landscape. In New Zealand, we have the Department of Conservation as a lead agency under the Wild Animal Control Act. And we also have territorial authorities called regional councils that have another set of powers under the Biosecurity Act, which provides some teeth to ensuring that pest numbers do get controlled across a landscape where they are impacting and having an issue. So the control intensities are broadly broken down into a spectrum from the most intensive down to the less intensive. At that top end, we have eradication in those highest biodiversity sites where we have isolated populations that can be removed entirely. We have at the next level down the sustained low density populations where the control is there to make sure those animals aren't having an impact on our high value habitats. The next layer down is where moderate numbers are being sustained. That's often in our rural agricultural landscapes where the impacts on productivity can be managed without having to reduce the numbers so low. And then at the bottom end of that, there's managed game sites, generally on private properties that are there for recreational pursuit and trophy hunting and the likes. Of course, resources cannot extend far enough for that intensified level of control to be happening everywhere. Those social, cultural, economic pressures all have to be considered to blend that landscape. So just very briefly, this is just a snapshot of Department of Conservation's new 10-year adaptive management strategy for goats, deer, wild pigs, tar and chamois. I won't go through it all. You can find it on the DOC website. Te Ara Ki Mua is the name of the strategy. And it breaks it down through all of those 4 underlying values that are associated with dealing with these invasive pests. And it breaks it right down to how we work with communities to get everyone on board for those operations. The other aspect that's really taken off in a big movement in New Zealand is the vision of a predator-free 2050. There's a link there to the predator-free website. Basically, the trust was set up in 2013 by a lot of philanthropic funding and government investment to support that. It's really about energising, connecting New Zealanders towards a predator-free Aotearoa in order to ensure our native species thrive. It's driven around raising awareness, encouraging every New Zealander and empowering that collective action, and developing and designing new tools to enable that higher level of intensive control. They also run a pest control apprenticeship our company has 3 such apprentices working for us as part of a training program to develop greater capability. It's a pretty ambitious goal to eradicate stoats, possums and rats by 2050 out of all of New Zealand. A lot of people say, is that achievable? Well, we take the philosophy that yes, with the will of the masses, the way will be found. And it is collective action that will achieve that. The other big movement in the last 10 years has been around the development of another philanthropic group called the Next Foundation, and a research component of that, which is called ZIP, Zero Invasive Pests. I have the link there again to their sites if you want to look at that. But again, they're funding large-scale pest control programs, and they're very much focused on innovation and research into techniques that might help get us to a predator-free 2050. Just moving on specifically to our subject of the 4 species of interest in New Caledonia, our pest control techniques. We have what is called a toolbox, and we have a saying that to control pests, you need to use all the tools in the toolbox. The first one that I'll go through is around our shooting operations, aerial and ground shooting, thermal night and day hunting. The second one is around dogs, with indicating dogs, bailing dogs, holding dogs, the use of GPS tracking on dogs. The third, trapping, a number of different trapping techniques out there. And I'll briefly touch on snares because I know they are used here as well. Number 4 is around some of the technology and innovations that are happening, particularly with the use of drones, activated sensors, celium networks on cage traps and things. A really important part is around the data collection, which I'll go over some of the systems we use. And then lastly, that contentious subject around the use of poisons and biological control. I'll give a very brief overview of how that is applied in New Zealand over those 4 species. So just on shooting techniques, the focus of control operations is really to reduce that population growth rate. And the key way of achieving that is that you have to target the females and the young in the first instance. A lot of recreational meat hunting, they focus on killing the stags, the males, but you need to change that whole psyche if you want to achieve pest control and reduce large numbers. You need to be able to intercept the breeding rates of that population. We operate with a number of safety rules. They aren't legally binding rules, but it's just an industry standard. When we're shooting at night with thermals, we never shoot more than 150 meters because you never know what's your detection is a lot less certain, and you need to be positive that what you're shooting is a target animal. In the daylight operations, we will shoot out to 350 meters. We can do longer shots, especially with new scope technology, but again, the risk of missing your animal and wounding or of a mistaken identity significantly higher. We have already had instances in the recreational hunting sector where guys have tried to shoot a deer out at 700 meters and not realized the deer was on a hunter's back, and they've shot the hunter. So we just don't take those sort of risks. In pest control operations, every shot should count as a fatal shot, because missing and woundings educate that population. Another shift from traditional shooting in New Caledonia, where everyone tends to head and neck shoot to save meat, and we always shoot in the engine room. And the engine room is your lung and your chest, and that is a much bigger target, and you know it's still going to be fatal. We have the New Zealand Firearms Safety Code. It's very similar to what New Caledonia has and what the FFCNC advocate as well, and it's very simple rules around making sure treating your firearm as if it's always loaded, always pointing it in a safe direction. You only load it when you're ready to fire. You identify your target beyond all doubt. You check your firing zones out behind you to make sure there's nothing in the background. You always store your ammunition and your firearms separately, and we have very stringent rules around even transporting them and having them in locked boxes. And the last one is around the use of alcohol and drugs. It impairs your judgment, and it's illegal to have a gun in your possession if you are under the influence. It's considered a criminal offence. With professional hunting, pest control, we also have a process of always notifying the police with every single operation we do. And that is to minimise risk for the police of the public ringing up and them having to send the armed defenders out because someone has complained that they heard some shots. We don't want to have the armed defenders turn up and point their guns at us. So it just gives assurance the police know what we're doing, and when they do get complaints or information come in, they ring us straight away and check that it's us and not someone else. A big part of that also is around making sure people are aware of what we're doing. So all our operations have signage like what's here that describe what we're up to, what the risks are that people need to be aware of. Most pest control companies they work across the spectrum of pests, and this is just a representation of my own firearms that I am using. It covers every type of animal. We have our centerfire rifles for large animals. There's a picture of the thermal scopes there, and the varmint rifles, the 22 and the 1.7 calibers for shooting cats and hares. And then we have some fairly specialist type firearms that are designed for shooting around residential areas. They're fully suppressed. People in the houses don't even know you fired a shot, and quite often you're shooting deer in someone's backyard and they're on their lawn. So yeah, they're what we call stealth guns. I won't bore you with the details of all the different types of ammunition, but there is a lot, and that's just an example of what my guys are using. Everything from high caliber through to fully suppressed rounds that travel at below the speed of sound, and also different ballistics for different animals that you're targeting. The question about using suppressors, it's really a question of whether you want to hear or not to hear, and we treat it as a must. It's a safety reason, of course. A lot of people are not aware that every time a rifle shot goes off, it's at a decibel that causes irretrievable hearing loss. And in a hunter, it starts in their left ear because they are right-handed, and that ear is closer to the rifle muzzle. I am already partially deaf in my left ear because of it, having shot for many years before suppressors came along as a tool to use. A lot of people go, well, why don't you use earmuffs and plugs instead of suppressors? They work fine if you're out in an open landscape and you can plan your hunt, but when you get into a forested area, they become a liability. You suppress your hearing ability, which affects your balance. You can't walk on uneven ground. You've got greater risk of falling over. And also you actually can't hear what you're trying to hunt and stalk. So you're handicapped by not being able to be in tune with what's in the environment. The other main reason is for success and effectiveness of our operations. Suppression reduces the amount of disturbance to the target animals. I have some videos showing this, and it means you can mob shoot an entire herd or get a bigger percentage of the herd. there's less disturbance for other animals around, like livestock and horses. You don't want a horse panicking and breaking a leg. And so it reduces those risks. And again, it reduces that risk of upsetting members of public when you're around residential areas, reduces the likelihood of the police getting called. Quickly over shooting techniques. A lot of this material was prepared for the hunting training that we were helping with PROTEGE project with over the last 2 weeks. Basically, we always utilize every bit of time you have available before an animal spooks, so that you make sure you take your steadiest shot. You should always stay calm and not be in a rush when you're professionally controlling these animals. They detect it as soon as there's panic in the air as well. So yeah, take the time to find a steady lying position, a prone position, resting on a tree, or using a standing tripod like what's shown in the picture. As previously mentioned, we use that time to work out who the lead animal is, the females usually, and you take those out first and the rest generally get confused. It gives you the opportunity to clean up more of the fawns and stags as well. The use of the shooting sticks, we don't use them all the time because again, it's about being suitable to the site. Very effective rabbit shooting out in open country and large open landscapes. Absolutely useless when you're in a forested environment because they're just a hindrance. You're shooting as closer quarters and you don't really have time to set them up before the animal cottons onto you being there. Just different styles of hunting. We use a mix of solo hunting, which is just one person out hunting on their own and just very low disturbance. We pair hunt where you know there's a larger number of animals and you want to be able to intercept or use your position yourself so that when the animals do break away from the initial shooting, you've got coverage and you can pick them up as they try to escape. And then we use what's called a wall of death. And that's where you have a team of hunters all lined up together and they sweep around a landscape in close formation, usually with an indicator dog at their heel. And it's really effective if you've got a confined habitat where the animals are likely to just run around and around inside that habitat rather than have the opportunity of escaping out across the landscape. Good for quick knockdown and also used a lot for eradication operations, particularly on islands with the likes. Moving on to the aerial pest control. This is one of our most effective tools. We use these sorts of firearms, they're military firearms. We have special endorsements as professional pest controllers. The general public can no longer access these firearms post the mosque shootings in Christchurch. We either have these guns, they have an aim point scope on them, which allows you to look with both eyes open and a red dot that's on the target animal. And the other weapon besides these ones is the use of semi-automatic shotguns, which are quick feeding and out of a helicopter where you're doing a lot of dynamic movement, you can snap shoot a lot quicker with a shotgun. So yeah, we combine a lot of these tools together. This is an example of using the thermal camera, which is mounted in the back of the helicopter in the view. Mark Beardsley standing in front there was our shooter for the day, sitting next to the pilot, and myself with my dogs in a cage. Hop in the back, we fly up to the top of the hill, we put the dogs into the vegetated area, they catch a pig, they flush the other pigs into the open. The thermal and the shooter can then shoot them out in the open. They land and pick us up. We move the dogs to where the pigs have moved into another patch of dense forest and do the same thing again. and in the morning you can really wreak havoc on a population when you do this. Aerial operations are highly regulated by our Civil Aviation Authority, and the helicopters need to be registered under the Wild Animal Control Act by the Department of Conservation. I'm sure New Caledonia will have a number of regulations that are not too dissimilar to what we do. A key thing with aerial work is the shooter, the spotter, and the pilot have to be have very good, clear communication and a strong working relationship to know what everyone's doing and what their jobs are. A good pilot will not compromise the shooter by putting the animal in a dangerous shooting zone. They set the animal up for the shooter to shoot, and the shooter is only targeting the animal that's been set up by the pilot. It's fast moving, the doors are off the machine, the seats are removed, and the shooter is harnessed in with a double harnessing system, the safety belt and an extra harness to prevent falling out, and all your equipment has to be secure because you don't want anything flying out of the helicopter into the rotors. A common conversation is around motion sickness, and it is really challenging. Some people within minutes of hopping in a helicopter are feeling sick. Other people can go all day without feeling sick. But it isn't an unsurmountable situation. With training and experience, you get accustomed. When I started, I could last half an hour, and I would I'd be telling the pilot, "Oh, it's not looking good." And now I can go about 3 hours, which is about as long as a tank of fuel in a helicopter lasts. So we can sort of work all day. You get your feet on the ground, you restabilize yourself. As I mentioned, we have a specific shooting zone. The rifle can only be put within that zone, which is about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock off the right-hand side of the helicopter, or 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock on the left-hand side of the helicopter. That avoids your rotors, your skids, and ensuring the rifle's never actually pointed into the cockpit of the helicopter. You have to have a constant awareness when you're chasing animals, because that horizon is just moving the whole time as the machine moves. A couple of quick clips for you just to get a feel for that. This was the start of it, coming in on the animals, and you notice there's 3 animals. They split. The pilot and the hunter have already figured out where those animals are going. Take the ones that come around, take the one that's branching off, potentially going to head away where we don't want it, and then come back to the one that's running into an open zone. So. Just lastly, on that aerial shooting aspect, all our rifles have got modification that makes sure that the ejected cartridges don't end up in the machine or getting caught up in the rotors of the helicopter, which can cause a crash. Now, there we go. I've mentioned meat recovery in a commercial context earlier. That was when there was commercial value in it and it was economical. We don't use it so much now. It's used where animals need to be removed from sensitive areas, such as high public use areas, or shooting around sports parks, places like that, where you simply can't leave a carcass. And it's also used to a limited degree for retrieval, where communities have requested some recovery of meat for consumption. But that's only ever done in the very easy access areas, not from remote areas. There's nothing gained in terms of efficiency by doing recovery. It's just an additional cost to the operation, and it's agreed to where part of the approval process it's been made as a request. That happens with pigs, rabbits, deer. Not with cats. So moving on to the thermal shooting component, this has revolutionised our hunting in terms of effectiveness. Just a quick snapshot there of looking through a thermal scope with the black heat detection on. You can change palettes and have a white heat or a coloured heat. But essentially, that's the sort of view that we have. There's no mistaking your identity on those targets. You can see everything in the backdrop. You can see what's behind you. There's cattle in the paddocks further back. And there's even a deer down in the bush there, but that operation was not about deer shooting, it was a rabbit control contract. So again, we know we can't take a shot because it's on the neighbour's property. There's also wires in the way that can get deflections. So we have to wait. This animal is now only 30 metres from us and it doesn't know we're there. It's shot in the engine room. It's already running dead. That shot was a fatal shot. But we just give it a second one just to speed that process up, just to be sure. And again, with the heat, you can actually see the 2 bullet holes in the side there. We were stalking in, my hunter's gone in very close, just assessing what those 3 deer are doing. We've got all the time in the world to take these shots. He's within 30 metres of those animals. He's working out which one is the target animal to hit first, which is this one that's standing there when I stop wobbling my camera. And just waiting. The animals sort of realise something's up, but it's not threatened, and it just goes back to feeding again. And he's standing 30, 35, 40 metres away from it. He's using a shooting stick, so he's got a good steady platform, and all the time to do what you need to do, waiting till all those animals are in the position you want them. Two of the animals were on the edge of the bush and he was waiting for them to move back out, just out of view. But he's dropped the lead hind, and then the other 2 come through, completely confused, not knowing where that shot came from because he was so close, it just echoed all around them. So they run quite blindly and then they stop because they don't know where to go. And so he whacks another one. That one's just been lung shot. That one's just been lung shot. And you track him around, confident of the shots, you know it's going to fall over. And there it goes. And there it goes. And if you look in the front, there's a rabbit sitting there completely undisturbed. Moving on to the use of dogs. This is a particular specialisation I have myself. These are some of my dogs on an operation in the South Island. But we break them down broadly into pursuit dogs and indicator dogs. There's a number of types of pursuit dogs, bailing dogs, which are very effective in any landscape, especially in the dense forests. They stand off and bark at the animal, and after they've stopped it from running. A holding dog basically gets in and pins the animal, and again, they are perhaps the most effective. There is a little bit of debate goes on about the ethics of using holding dogs, but at the end of the day, this is about controlling a pest that is killing a lot of other native animals, and it's very hard to say that the fact that a dog has held on to a pig is any worse than a pig having killed a keg or one of your endangered birds. Coursing dogs are the sort of dogs, quite a traditional hunting technique where they chase the animals out into open ground, and the hunter waits and shoots them. It is used quite a lot for cats, which tend to go up trees or go down underground where they can be fumigated. The use of the little dogs in those photos are specialist predator dogs under the conservation dog program, and they're specially trained for cats and stoats. The indicator dogs, where the dog doesn't leave the hunter's side, and it just tells the hunter that there's an animal in close proximity. We use them on deer and cats and rabbits, not so much on pigs, because pigs tend to be buried in very dense habitat, and you still can't close the gap to get a shot at them. Good for locating cat dens as well. A den is where the cat's sleeping, and for flushing them out of dense cover. They have to work within eyesight of the dog handler, and as a result, they are not quite as efficient and effective in dense forests where that visibility is hard, and the animal quite often detects, the pest animal detects you before you can locate it. But great in semi-open forests and broken landscapes where there's a patchy vegetation. It is also time consuming using an indicator dog because you have to walk the dogs onto the animals as opposed to pursuit dogs that can range out and locate an animal that might be 500 meters, 1 kilometer away from you. So you can cover a lot more ground using a pursuit dog. To do a job, a conservation pest control job, but some breeds are easier to train than others, and easier to control. We use a mix of breeds. The terriers are very strong in their pursuit and their catching, chasing and catching, but they're also harder to keep at the heel. Once they find a scent, they just want to go and hunt it down. The working dogs that have been bred, the New Zealand heading dogs, Australian dogs, bearded collies and border collies, they're used predominantly used. Most hunters have got that breeding in their hunting dogs. They're versatile because they're such fast, they're hardy, strong dogs. They have a lot of stamina, and they've got a high level of intelligence to outfox an animal that is also highly intelligent and adapted to evasion. So they're a really good mix to have in your hunting dog, your working dog. Pointers and setters, a breed that is very strong for indicating. They have it trained into them to stop and just tell you that there's an animal there, but they will break that, and so the hunter still has to train them to stay at heel and not want to go and flush too early. But again, we mix all of these three breeds together, and because you can pull out the best of those variables in their disposition, in their nature. Use of dogs is the paramount thing with using dogs is that it has to be a very strong relationship between the dog handler and the dog. Those dogs have to be fit and healthy. They have to be exercised regularly to prevent injuries, and so they remain focused. They have to be under command and control, and they have to be specifically trained to find and catch only the target animal. That is what we do for professional pest control. Is the dog has to be a professional as much as the hunter. And in New Zealand, we have a process of certification, so the dogs get get certified as professional dogs. Miriam Ritchie here is one of our top predator dog handlers for stoat and cat and rat detection. And it's just a photo of her working with her little dog, a border terrier, Foxy Cross. And these are my own team of dogs. A lot of hunters laugh at them because they look like poodles, but these are pig-specific dogs that have been trained. Incredibly friendly, biddable. They want to please, they want to do the right thing, and they are a mix of those breeds that I mentioned before. And just some proof of the effectiveness of them. Those are just the large jaws from the jaws from the very big boars that we've caught, those dogs have caught. It's the dedication and commitment of those dogs to be focused that gets them to produce those results. Moving on to the trapping techniques, all our trapping now, we use either automatic feeders or trail cameras to help improve the effectiveness of our trapping. We do a lot of pre-feeding, and the use of those tools, the feeders and the trail cameras, helps minimize that disturbance, which is key. The less human scent you have around your traps, the sooner they'll start catching for you. There's many different styles. I'll go skim through the pig and deer traps, and the ones that we see as the best ones that are out there at the moment. Cat and rabbit traps, again, I'll run through some slides on those. And then snaring, as I mentioned, I've noticed they are used quite a lot here in New Caledonia. That's great because they are an effective tool. In New Zealand, we've had a lot of conflict over using snares because people's pet dogs have been caught in them. The animal ethics groups have made a lot of noise around using snares. We do use them, but only in the most remote locations where the chances of a non-target getting caught is lower. And all our snares have a stopper so that they do not strangulate. And they have a spring loading so that when the animal is caught and they panic, they don't end up with amputations and dislocations and the likes. So it's a situation where there's limited areas in New Zealand that we do use them. Moving on to the other traps, and in particular the pig and deer traps. This is the pig brig. It was designed in a pig eradication in Guam by some guys who were having trouble catching pigs, and they got a whole lot of fishing nets together, and voila, they found a really effective tool. The pigs get in there by pre-feeding with the nets up. When you drop the nets after they're used to pushing under the net, they then can't get back out. It's a really simple method for catching mobs of pigs. Mine gate. This is a very expensive piece of equipment that is great in agricultural landscapes. If you have a high population of animals and it's economical to go and fly this equipment in a helicopter and set it up, it's another option. It's remote activated. That gate can be activated from your computer at home while you're watching the animals come and go from the trap. You can catch an entire herd in one of those traps with that sort of gate setup. They are very expensive and they are obviously not that portable. But if you are having issues with big numbers in an area around pastoral areas, agricultural areas, and also in remoter areas where you have some open ground, they're worth exploring. Corral traps are a very traditional type of trap, but again, very effective, easy to set up. They're just mesh, very similar to the cage traps that I've seen designed here in New Caledonia, but with a different mode of entry where the animals can keep feeding in, whereas with a cage trap, once the trigger goes off, you've only caught what's in there. The bigger this corral, the more animals you'll get going in there. The mesh basically just gets held open as an entrance. The animals walk in while they're pre-feeding. You close the mesh and they push through, and then once they're in, there's no return. It's a one-way valve. And then the traditional cage traps. Most of the ones I've seen in New Caledonia have been guillotine doors, drop doors. We also use swinging doors a lot, which work in the same way, but they just hang differently, and either are just as effective. Good for catching smaller mobs. If you haven't a lot of animals around, they become ineffective because the ones that don't go in get educated. So yeah, you've got to decide whether you're going to catch a few animals or try and target a whole mob at once. With cat trapping, there's so many tools out there for trapping, but these are just some of the effective ones that we do use. They're very traditional. The chimney box that's in that photo has traps like the Victor Softjaw in the photo on the left. They're positioned inside there. Cats love dropping down in through holes, and there's something about they feel safe doing that, and we've found they're really attractive for cats to enter. The trap down below, I think I'll talk about that further on. There's another example of it. Traditional traps again, the Fen Mark 6, and a little bit more recently designed in New Zealand is the Doc 200 traps. The Fen is a very old trap, but it is highly effective for catching cats. In that photo, you have a tunnel that goes over the top to protect your ground-dwelling birds so they don't end up on the traps. And the photo on the right is just another example that we have designed to keep kiwi out of the boxes. They can't probe their bills in far enough, but the cats can still squeeze through the holes. Yeah, and then these are two very new innovations in the last 10 years, 15 years in New Zealand. A designer in New Zealand who's made them as a trap inventor. They're one of the few traps that have actually passed our National Animal Welfare Committee's approval, which requires an animal to be unconscious in 30 seconds and dead with no pulse within 3 minutes. He modified on the bottom right the traditional coney bear, which has been around for a long, long time, by strengthening the springs, and it meets that standard. The SA2, which is the black box trap, is perhaps our most effective killing trap. They're highly attractive. Cats love putting their heads into them for some reason. And in that example there, they also catch possums, which they, again, are ethically approved for. But that becomes the ultimate in pre-feeding for a cat, because the cat comes along and starts eating on the back legs of the possum. We take the possum out of the trap, put the leg in the trap, and the next night you catch the cat. And that's a practice that could very easily be done with rats or whatever other food sources you might have in New Caledonia that cats are interested in. In terms of cage trapping or live capture trapping, this particular box is the most attractive trap, live capture trap box that we have. Again, cats love, and rabbits, these are very effective for catching rabbits. There's something about being inside a tunnel that they find really attractive, as opposed to a steel mesh cage. For some reason, cats are very wary of cages. We generally mask our cages with sacks and things to make it look like a tunnel. But these traps, they work really well. They get scent in them from having caught, and that scent becomes quite a strong attractant for the animals. The timber gets impregnated with scent. Again, just a very simple guillotine door with a tread pedal in the back, and your bait in a location behind the tread pedal. Cage traps, this is our most commonly used one. a double door. I've seen them, no, I haven't seen them here. But either way, whichever way they come in, both doors will drop. In that photo on the left, you can see how we've heavily masked all the mesh on the floor of the traps, and that's to avoid the cat sensing the steel standing on it. And even the tread plate has moss and soil placed on it. The bait is a very big morsel, because you really need to cast scent to catch cats. These live capture traps, we use the celium nodes on, so that as soon as that trap is activated, it's a motion activation. You get a notification on your computer, you know exactly which trap has gone off, you know exactly which trap to go and check. And it deals with the issue that for ethical reasons, you need to check every live capture trap every day, because you cannot leave an animal to die in a trap from starvation and dehydration. So those celium node networks allow you to go and confidently know that your network, you've had an activation and you need to check that specific trap. Very good for efficiency. I'll just skim through this. This is a whole lot of detail around trapping techniques. Kill traps are very good for low cost, large scale coverage. We raise every cat trap in particular off the ground to prevent non-targets like your ground dwelling birds. Cats have a preferred angle of 35 degrees roundabouts. Too steep, they won't use them, and too low, your non-targets will climb up them. We put out one trap to every 20 hectares when we're targeting cats in a habitat. We use different baits. We use the local food sources that are available, and we use salted baits quite a lot for longevity of your bait. But you have to be wary that with a salted bait, it's not actually food, it's a lure. And as a result, being very salty, if they get access to it, they can then become averted to wanting to eat it again. So you have to be very careful that you dispose of salted baits in a way that you're not leaving them in your environment, which we bury them basically. Cage traps are the most attractive for catching animals, but as mentioned, they're costly to service because you need to check them daily, unless you invest in a activation like a celium node. And the use of leg hold traps, I showed that chimney box earlier. That's where we put a leg hold trap down in there. But again, they're no different to a live capture. They're catching an animal and not killing it, so you need to check them daily unless you have an activation tool on them. With the technological advances that have been happening, the big movement is really in thermaling. And this photo's of a chap, Jordan Munn, who's got a company called Trap and Trigger, and he has really stepped thermal imaging up in New Zealand with the thermal camera he's using. We use it for surveillance and detection, and also mainly for eradication and low density residual populations where you're trying to get the numbers incredibly low. The cost of aerial operations are expensive, but when you do it, you want to do it the best way you can. And in this situation, his camera has a range finding capability. It has a laser that points to the animal so that the shooter can actually see where the animal is in amongst the vegetation, because the shooter doesn't have the thermal all the time. They're only looking with their visual to get a positive ID. And it's recording all of that information as well. So for surveillance and detection, you can go and fly a massive area, pick up all that information, and then analyze it and look at what sort of population's there. This is an example just from a pig eradication on Waiheke Island, where we use this technique, this technology. It's a 6,000 hectare island, and we eradicated the pigs over a 5-year period. And then we had Trap and Trigger come through and do the surveillance. Within 3.2 hours, he had covered that landscape and obviously detected no pigs. But it is a tool that we do not use for just general control work. It is a tool we use for eradications and what we call zero density, which is where an animal turns up, you get rid of it straight away. Just moving on to the use of drones. I've seen some really good footage that has been happening here in New Caledonia for survey work with drones and detecting rooster populations. We have been using drones in that sort of capacity for a little while, but in the last 2 or 3 years, we've taken that to using it to help with your search and destroy. We just have a little video here, which is done by a company called High Country Contractors.
Yeah, that's the wallaby. Can you see it on your screen?
Yeah, roger. I can see it there, just tucked up in the scrub.
The result of using these tools means we're able to effectively and efficiently remove the last remaining pests in low density areas, which we all acknowledge used to be a major challenge. Basically, having an eye in the sky day and night with our skilled teams on the ground provides confidence in achieving desired results.
Yeah, so before having the drone, we just spent a lot of time just hunting each creek, each little gully, any little habitat where the wallabies would like. Can be a bit frustrating because you know there's a wallaby there, but you just can't see it. It might be below you on the face or it might just be above you. So just now being able to see the sign, call in the pilot, who then just brings the drone in, and it's just amazing what it picks up. And the drone sees a lot more than what we can see on the ground, especially sometimes the scrub, or often the scrub's at head height, while the drone's got a bird eye view of it. You know, like even this gully here, it'd probably take me a day to hunt that effectively, and then we can just send that drone up, and within half an hour, just like what happened before, we spotted a wallaby, worked as a team, and got the job done.
So tonight we're doing a thermal wallaby operation. We're doing that with obviously our Matrice 300 RTK tonight, which is running the Zimmer's H20T quad sensor, and that's obviously got our thermal on it. Using that thermal key with that spotlight tonight, and that is really being effective here.
Smaller Mavic 2 Enterprise allows us to be more targeted and go into those areas where we can't get the bigger drone, which means that the operators can carry it using both of these drones and using them in conjunction with the other methods that we're utilising. So yeah, it is pretty exciting, and I think it's definitely a game changer.
Can you see that wallaby itch?
Yeah, it's just down to the left of you. I'm about 30 metres. Just take it real slow now.
What did you get if you can't from the far side shooting it?
With your boys, managed to locate 2 wallabies with the drone. I managed to get a shot from the other side here and shot one, and as the other one bounced out, the hunter on the other side there managed to get the other one as well. So the drone's a game changer.
We need all the tools possible to achieve these shared goals. We're excited for the future, embracing new innovation and seeing these goals become a reality.
Merci Glen pour toutes ces informations extrêmement riches et évidemment comme les 2 semaines passées avec toi qui pourront alimenter, que ce soit immédiatement ou dans les années à venir, ce qui va se construire en Nouvelle-Calédonie parce qu'en termes de régulation professionnelle, malgré des actions déjà menées localement par la Fédération de la faune et de la chasse, nous en sommes qu'au début et c'est certainement, notamment grâce à toi, une nouvelle ère qui s'ouvre pour la Nouvelle-Calédonie. Avant de remercier définitivement Glen, je voudrais juste vous demander si vous aviez des questions. J'en ai moi-même, mais je vous laisse la priorité de poser les vôtres. Bon, je vais lancer la première. Glen, tu nous as présenté beaucoup de nouveautés, on va dire, techniques qui, depuis près de 20 ans, sont utilisées quasi quotidiennement en Nouvelle-Zélande. Est-ce que tu pourrais nous dire, concernant la lunette thermique, donc qui permet à la fois d'observer les animaux de jour et de nuit, sans qu'eux-mêmes puissent détecter l'opérateur, si d'une part, cette méthode pourrait être adaptée dans le contexte forêt humide de la Nouvelle-Calédonie. Pour information, nous avons fait une petite visite au parc des Grandes Fougères avec Glen. Donc, est-ce que ce genre d'outil pourrait être utilisé dans un contexte forêt humide en Nouvelle-Calédonie de jour ou de nuit? Et par ailleurs, en Nouvelle-Zélande, quel a été le niveau d'amélioration de l'efficacité des actions de régulation?
Your humid forest is cooler than out in your open landscapes. Obviously, it gets very hot out in the open, and we do use our thermals during the daytime to help detect animals, because particularly things like rooster deer, they often can see you from 100 odd meters away in the forest. And the hunter that's trying to find them has difficulty seeing them at that range, but the thermal straight away tells you the animal's there, and then you can target how you sneak up on it to get the shot. But I think in terms of open landscape work as well, in some of those dry forest areas, the fact that you can see animals out to 1.5 kilometers, where the traditional use of spotlights, you can only see 300 meters. It gives you the ability to plan an approach to target those animals without disturbing them. We had a really good example up at Lafar one night where we were watching 25 rooster deer at 600 meters, and one of the participants decided to put their light on to see if they could see them, and those animals at 500 or 600 meters, we couldn't detect them in the spotlight, but the instant that light cast over them, they bolted. The whole mob disappeared into the forest. That hunter with that spotlight would not have known those animals were there. They would have walked over there and not seen anything. So that's the effectiveness of this tool, the thermal imaging. It's eyes in the dark. That's the real benefit. We achieve the same level of population control, probably about a third of the cost that going out and doing traditional hunting achieves. When you first implement it, you eliminate all those animals that previously or have previously developed and adapted to avoid the traditional techniques. That is a step change in what you can achieve.
Quel a été le facteur multiplicateur de leur efficacité avec lunettes thermiques par rapport à l'usage simple de la régulation sans lunettes thermiques?
Well, easily tenfold more effective. 10 times more easy. So, no, it's like I say, it's a step change and it's a revolution in terms of effectiveness. So.
Peut-être un petit mot de Pascal, qui représente ce soir la fédération et dont la structure fédération est associée à cette conférence.
Je n'ai pas forcément de questions, il y a juste des petites précisions que j'ai déjà faites lors de la formation. Quand on parle par exemple de chiens, bon, c'est un domaine que je connais un peu. Et quand il parle de, par exemple, bon, c'est un peu technique, hein, je suis désolé, mais quand il parle de pointer, je recommence ce que j'ai dit la dernière fois, il ne parle pas de la race en elle-même, hein, du chien pointer, hein. Il parle de chiens qui pointent en fait. Donc dedans, on englobe toutes les races, par exemple, de braque, hein, qui existent. D'ailleurs, l'un des chiens les plus utilisés en Nouvelle-Zélande, ce sont, enfin, les races de braque qui sont le plus utilisées en Nouvelle-Zélande sont le braque hongrois, hein, qui est quand même beaucoup utilisé, mais aussi le braque allemand. Voilà, c'était juste une petite précision technique, pardonnez-moi. Concernant le thermique, c'est vraiment quelque chose vers lequel je pense il faut aller. La fédération s'est déjà engagée dans cette voie-là et utilise depuis quelque temps pour l'observation surtout et la détection d'organes de caméras thermiques. Et on y voit vraiment un bénéfice, hein, à la fois dans la détection, enfin surtout dans la détection, parce que pour l'instant on ne l'a toujours pas utilisé au tir, hein, on attend les dérogations pour pouvoir le faire. Mais dans la détection, c'est vraiment un plus. Et couplé, comme on a pu le voir dans l'opérationnel avec du drone thermique, c'est vraiment un outil de contrôle et de régulation vers lequel, je pense, sur certaines aires ou dans certains endroits, il faudra aller.
Merci Pascal. Samuel, pour la province Nord.
Oui, bonjour, oui, Samuel Nourri, province Nord. Merci déjà pour toute la présentation, hein, bien complète au niveau des modalités techniques et puis de tout ce que vous avez expérimenté à votre niveau. La question, je voulais revenir, c'était sur ce sur quoi vous avez insisté à la fin, sur le fait d'avoir des financements pérennes pour mettre en œuvre toutes ces actions de régulation. J'ai cru comprendre qu'il y avait forcément le DOC qui finançait tout ça et puis un fonds de philanthropes. Mais quels sont les autres modes de financement qu'il y aurait éventuellement en Nouvelle-Zélande et qui vous permettent aussi de mettre en œuvre tout ça? Et vous-même, en tant qu'opérateur, justement, comment vous pouvez financer, enfin, en tout cas, mettre en œuvre toutes ces régulations grâce aux financements qui sont faits pour cela, quoi.
Does fund from central government a big chunk of pest control. The regional councils, our territorial authorities also have proactively developed a rating system that is targeted towards pest control. So there's local ratepayer funding, residents ratepayer funding that feeds into our pest control programs in New Zealand. The other modes of funding through the commercial sector, like I talked about the carbon farming sector, they are doing pest control out of necessity to protect their investment, and it is a short-term approach that they are using. But the big question is what happens when their forests mature and the deer and the goats and the hares are no longer impacting on their planted trees because they've hardened up and matured. That's a question that the government is currently still working on, with so much in the landscape turning into prime pest control habitat. How do we keep that moving? I think, as I mentioned, we have a penchant to see that there's a problem and look at where there's a will, we'll find a way. And I think the New Zealand government is in that space about with that Te Aramura strategy that I mentioned. It is really about empowering more New Zealanders to proactively get into going out and doing pest control. I think that's a big question mark about where that goes in the future. But the second part of your question around, you know, as a pest control operator, and yes, certainly we, as an organisation and a company, we are benefiting from the increase in pest control work that's available, whether it's coming through private landowners taking the initiative themselves, the government, or the forestry carbon companies. There is a real growth in the pest control industry as a result of this escalation of resources, and I think that that's a healthy thing, because our society has lost over when the numbers were lower because of that venison recovery, we started losing hunters. People were losing interest in hunting because it was not viable for them to go hunt and get an animal. It was becoming too much hard work, and the number of hunters in New Zealand actually started to drop off as a result of that. It's an intrinsic value for most people that they want to get a reward from what they're doing. So with this advent of more funding and the fact that the population has started to expand post the commercial recovery, venison, the number of hunters is increasing, and as I mentioned, we have the likes of Predator 2050 funding apprenticeship programs, which is very similar to what PROTEGE is working on with these professional hunters. It is a growth industry, and I think that's a great space to have, because it really reinforces the culture in New Zealand around how we treat invasive species. We see them as a priority to deal with. So.
Une question du président de la Fédération de la faune et de la chasse.
Ça ne sera pas une question, mais plutôt un commentaire. C'est vrai que la chasse évolue. Les moyens modernes nous permettent d'être beaucoup plus efficaces. Mais moi, mon grand souci, parce que la plupart d'entre vous ne le savent peut-être pas, ou entendent des bruits, mon plus grand souci pour moi, pour la Fédération de la faune et de la chasse, que je représente ici, 4500 adhérents, ça fait beaucoup de monde. Le plus grand souci que j'ai pour mes chasseurs, enfin nos chasseurs, c'est l'accès à la chasse, en fait. On a des petites zones dont on s'occupe parfaitement. On s'est bien occupé, on a bien descendu tout ce qu'il fallait faire, on l'a fait. Mais on ne peut pas aller où justement il y a des problèmes et on nous refuse des accès pratiquement. Et notre plus grande difficulté aujourd'hui, c'est celle-là. Les chasseurs sont efficaces, mais pour être efficace, il faut pouvoir accéder aux problèmes. Ouais. On a démontré qu'on pouvait être efficace, par exemple à Lepredour, on a nettoyé les cerfs à Lepredour, et après il en reste quoi? Moins d'une dizaine, alors qu'il y en avait 700 ou 800 qui stationnaient sur une petite zone comme le Lepredour. Les lapins, pareil, on a tué plus de 18 000 lapins en l'espace de 2 petites années de chasse, 2 petites années. Et aujourd'hui, c'est même difficile d'arriver à tuer 2 ou 3 lapins par jour, alors qu'on en faisait 400, 500 dans une soirée. Ouais. Bon, là, il n'y avait pas de problème. La province nous avait confié l'îlot Lepredour, on l'a nettoyé. Un autre îlot privé, on nous a chargé de nettoyer également au niveau du cerf. C'était l'îlot Puin, il est nettoyé. D'ailleurs, Puin et Lepredour, c'est 2 îlots où les troupeaux de cerfs se déplaçaient de l'un à l'autre. Voilà, c'est parce que les cerfs savent nager. Et pour maintenir ces îlots en bon état, c'est-à-dire au niveau des animaux, c'est d'avoir une pression de chasse permanente. Voilà. Dès que le besoin s'en fait sentir, on y va, on fait le nettoyage. Voilà. Mais je reviens là-dessus, c'est que j'adore les forêts calédoniennes. Je suis vraiment amoureux des forêts, et ça me désole de voir les dégâts qu'il y a là-dedans. Parce que, et encore, je ne vois pas tout. Mais le problème qu'on a, c'est les accès. Voilà. Les gens refusent les accès ou s'attribuent des zones domaniales comme si c'était leur propriété. Voilà. C'est le gros problème que nous avons. Ouais. Alors, on peut dire tout ce qu'on veut, les chasseurs sont efficaces, on peut avoir des chasseurs professionnels, mais même les chasseurs professionnels au sol, ils auront les mêmes problèmes que nous au niveau des accès. Alors, je ne sais pas comment le dire, mais bon, je voudrais qu'enfin on nous entende, enfin, le gouvernement ou les provinces, peut-être qu'ils entendent quand même ce cri qu'on a. Les chasseurs, ils sont prêts à y aller, mais on refuse, on ne veut pas qu'ils y aillent. Alors, il y en a parfois qui y vont, mais c'est des petites quantités. Il faut quand même dire que les chasseurs, chaque année, tuent environ 120 000 cerfs. Chaque année. Il ne faut pas dire que les chasseurs calédoniens sont inefficaces. C'est totalement faux et ça, je refuse de l'entendre. 120 000 cerfs en moins chaque année. Mais je reconnais que les 120 000 cerfs qui sont tués chaque année en Nouvelle-Calédonie, ce n'est même pas la production du troupeau. Si on considère la Calédonie avec son ensemble de troupeaux de cerfs qu'il y a en Nouvelle-Calédonie. Certains disent 400 000 et d'autres disent jusqu'à 700 000. Alors, vous imaginez 700 000 cerfs en train de faire de la reproduction, le petit 120 000 qu'on abat chaque année, c'est ridicule. Donc, on est en constante progression. J'ajoute que depuis 2 ans, on a des pluies constamment. La végétation est montée en hauteur et on ne voit pratiquement plus les animaux. Mais j'augure que d'ici 1 an, quand les premières sécheresses vont réapparaître également des nouveaux troupeaux de cerfs que cette végétation a cachés. Pour l'instant, on ne les voit pas trop. Ça commence déjà à se voir, mais ce n'est pas encore tout à fait ça. Mais quand ça va être sec, que la végétation va descendre, à mon avis, on va être vraiment envahi de cerfs. Voilà, mon souci, c'est celui-là. L'accès au domaine, c'est la priorité numéro 1. Bien entendu, j'adhère totalement avec toutes ces nouvelles méthodes qu'on peut mettre en place au niveau des chasseurs professionnels. C'est vrai que ça existe en Nouvelle-Zélande, pourquoi pas en Nouvelle-Calédonie, bien entendu. Hein. Voilà. Ben, je vous remercie de m'avoir écouté.
À tes revendications ou tes remarques, sans doute que Glen pourra difficilement répondre. Moi-même, je ne vais pas pouvoir répondre à cette demande que tu effectues depuis assez longtemps. C'est vrai, d'avoir accès à des nouvelles zones de chasse. Juste par rapport à ces 3 points, sans doute que c'est légitime, mais il n'a jamais été dit que les chasseurs calédoniens n'étaient pas efficaces. Et il est clair que dans des zones faciles d'accès, comme d'ailleurs en Nouvelle-Zélande, la chasse récréative, notamment, apporte évidemment son lot d'intérêt et sa contribution active à la régulation. La régulation professionnelle, donc je n'oppose pas à la chasse récréative, n'est pas là donc pour entrer en compétition avec les chasseurs qui chassent soit par plaisir, soit pour les trophées, soit pour la nourriture, mais a bien vocation à se développer là où la chasse actuellement est nulle et n'est pas en mesure de pouvoir réguler les populations de cerfs là où les impacts sont les plus importants. Et paradoxalement, les impacts ne sont pas les plus importants là où les populations de cerfs sont les plus importantes et où l'accès est plus facile. Non, les impacts les plus importants sont dans les zones de forêt humide, en tête de bassin versant, avec un double impact négatif. Un premier impact négatif direct sur la biodiversité des forêts humides, pas seulement le sous-bois, que parfois les cerfs ont consommé en quasi-totalité, mais également les autres espèces animales qui y vivent. Et puis un effet évidemment que tout le monde connaît en Nouvelle-Calédonie, un effet secondaire, un impact secondaire sur la ressource en eau. Et l'objectif de PROTEGE, c'est bien à la fois non pas d'intervenir là où les chasseurs interviennent déjà, dans les zones faciles d'accès et où par ailleurs leur action est salvatrice, mais bien dans des zones très difficiles d'accès, où la régulation évidemment est beaucoup plus difficile qu'ailleurs, à la fois pour un bénéfice environnemental, donc sur les forêts humides, et sur un bénéfice direct sur la ressource en eau. Donc pas d'opposition, on peut te rassurer, Pierre, pas d'opposition entre la régulation d'une part et la chasse traditionnelle d'autre part. J'espère que ça répond en partie à ton inquiétude.
Je te remercie, Patrick, mais je suis tout à fait d'accord avec toi. Les chasseurs professionnels seront complémentaires, voire même en première ligne, comme on dit, le premier de cordée. Ça devrait être les premiers de cordée. Voilà. Mais ce que je le dis encore une fois, l'accès au domaine, c'est la première chose qu'on doit mettre en œuvre en Nouvelle-Calédonie, parce qu'il y a bien des endroits qui sont accès faciles, mais qui sont interdits aux chasseurs. C'est-à-dire que c'est fermé. Voilà, il y a des barrières.
Merci Pierre. Une dernière question peut-être? Et si ça n'est pas le cas, ça ne semble pas être le cas, je donnerai la parole en dernier peut-être à la CPS, à Julie, mais à titre personnel comme au nom du CEN, eh bien, je renouvelle mes sincères remerciements, non seulement aux personnes qui se sont déplacées ce soir pour écouter Glen, mais évidemment surtout à Glen pour sa contribution directe et majeure, à la fois aux 2 semaines qui se sont écoulées pour former en appui de la Fédération de la faune et de la chasse les 25 premières personnes, parmi lesquelles nous avons la moitié des personnes qui vivent directement dans les zones les plus impactées. Donc, ce sont des zones issues des tribus des zones protège. Ça, c'est quand même symptomatique. Et puis, par ailleurs, à toute sa contribution aux années à venir sur le développement de la régulation, qui malheureusement n'est pas une option, mais un état d'urgence. Merci encore. Et je laisse peut-être le mot de la fin soit à Carole, la responsable du projet PROTEGE pour les espèces envahissantes, ou Julie de la CPS. Merci Glen.
Je pense que tu as dit l'essentiel, hein, donc je ne vais pas m'éterniser. Merci en tout cas à Glen. Merci pour cette formation. Moi, j'ai des retours que positifs sur les 15 jours qui se sont déroulés pour tous ceux qui ont été formés par l'équipe du CEN PROTEGE. Donc, merci pour tout ça. Merci d'être venu. On a attendu un long moment cette formation. On est content d'avoir pu la tenir dans le cadre de PROTEGE. Donc, merci pour tout. Et effectivement, comme tu le disais, on a des actions de régulation dans le cadre du thème 4, mais également dans le cadre du thème 3, puisqu'on a aussi tout ce qui est régulation sur les bassins versants. Donc voilà, c'est aussi de la gestion intégrée. C'est aussi, voilà, on prend le bassin versant et puis on fait de la régulation, de la mise en défense. Donc en tout cas, j'ai bien entendu aussi le président de la fédération et les différentes remarques. Alors, je ne suis pas le gouvernement, je ne suis pas les provinces, donc je ne vais pas pouvoir répondre non plus. Mais en tout cas, on essaiera de relayer votre message. Voilà. Donc merci à tous encore d'être venus ce soir et merci aux intervenants. Merci beaucoup.